Thanks for staying up later. Ellen Burstyn, the Oscar-winning actor, is with us. She's appearing, or will be appearing, beginning in April in Shimada on Broadway, and we'll talk about that in just a bit. But, of course, you know her work from Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore and The Exorcist and The Last Picture Show and other films. Is it The Exorcist more so than anything else? Not necessarily because it's your best work. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. But just because of the impact it had, the popularity it had. Is that the one that people still recognize you for the most?
Two films, The Exorcist and Resurrection. And Resurrection was a film that was released in 1979 where I played a healer, and it wasn't a big box office smash, but it's kind of gotten to be a cult film and a classic in a way. And I meet people all over the world who tell me that it's affected them in a really deep way, and it was one of their favorite films. So it was almost 7 years after it was released before I finally got Universal to see that it had value as a film and to release it on videotape. I sent them a stack of letters. I wrote to the head of the company, sent them a stack of letters saying, why can't we get it on tape? And they very nicely responded.
I only recall this vaguely, but there was a car accident. One person killed, you nearly killed, badly hurt, and then through this experience you discover that you have healing power. Mm-hmm. You heal yourself, and then you wind up touching and healing others.
That's right.
Do you believe that there are human beings who have healing power? Obviously, there are a lot of charlatans who use that cynically, but do you believe that it exists in some cases legitimately?
Oh, I have no doubt about that. During the course of my research for Resurrection, I spent about 6 months going to all different healers, and I did meet some people who were not very effective, but I met some who were very effective. And one woman in particular, Rosalind Bruyere, was so helpful that we hired her to be the technical advisor on the show. And so she was on the film with me every day, showing me where to put my hands and actually helping me to feel the subtle energies from the body so that I could actually do a little bit of healing myself. She was so effective that when there were injuries on the set, she healed them immediately. And everybody started out with a very cynical attitude toward her, and by the end of the show, nobody had any doubts.
Believing, as you do, that that sort of phenomenon can actually exist in the flesh, how do you feel if you come across somebody on television who sits there and says, I see a woman somewhere with a pain in her back, and Jesus is healing it right now, and there's someone in the Northwest with a broken foot, or someone someplace else who has cancer, and I command that it be healed? Doesn't that just curdle your blood when they do that?
Well, it depends. Maybe it works. We don't know. I mean, I try not to have a closed mind about what people's mind can do to their bodies, because so much of illness is some kind of distortion in the psyche that's manifesting in the body. And so if you can use the psyche to get back to where the problem is, it can heal the body. So, you know, I'm not... I don't judge people's belief or faith, because so many people are really helped by their belief. And if it works, it works.
Your role as the mother in The Exorcist, was that the most demanding role of your career?
I would say so, yes. It was very difficult on many levels. First of all, just the fact that it took 9 months to shoot. And 9 months of 12 to 14, 15 hours a day, 6 days a week can get to be really killing. But also all the special effects were very difficult, and we had to redo and redo and redo because of special effects. And then, too, we were dealing with very heavy forces, you know. And, I mean, when you really take on the idea of the war between good and evil in a serious way, a lot of things get activated, so it was a really kind of frightening experience for all of us.
Well, you're one who studied with Strasberg, and you're a devotee of the method, and I would think if you go all the way with the method, and you've got to get yourself in this mindset and inhabit the psyche of this character, and it goes on for 9 months, that must actually take a considerable personal toll.
It takes a toll if you're not careful. I mean, part of my training is to be really clear about the fantasy and the reality. Now, naturally, you use your own personal reality to kind of stir up what you need for the fantasy. But, you know, for centuries, women have been playing Medea, and if actresses don't learn how to control their emotions at the end of the performance, then their children would be in jeopardy, right? So it's very important to be able to separate what's the character and what's the home base.
What was your reaction to The Exorcist? A lot of it came from the Catholic Church. Some of it wasn't specifically a religious reaction. It was just people saying, hey, wait a minute, our sensibilities are offended here. They've gone too far.
Well, of course, it was a very controversial book, and so we expected quite a bit of reaction, although I must say that nothing prepared us for the reaction that occurred. I mean, once I remember sitting in my house in California and seeing on the news that people were lined up in Montreal for since 4 a.m. in a blizzard to wait for the movie theater to open. I just couldn't believe that there was that kind of focus and interest in it. And then, of course, it had a much stronger reaction on people psychologically than I ever thought it was going to. I mean, I know that...
It was frightening.
Yeah, and people were really disturbed on a deep level in their dreams, and you know, a therapist have told me that their patients were really unsettled by it. And I had a funny experience. I was in Phoenix or Denver, I can't remember where we shot. Alice doesn't live here anymore. And The Exorcist was opening there. And so I decided to take all the crew from the film to the movie theater as a present, a night out. And we went to the theater and we were watching. And there was one scene in the film, which was the scene where everybody fainted. And it was, everybody thought that the difficult scenes were the throwing up and everything. But no, it was the needle in the neck. That's where people fainted, the hypodermic needle in the neck. And this one woman was running up the aisle because she felt she was about to faint, and she collapsed in the aisle. And I and other people got up and ran over to help her, and she was passed out, and I was right over her face, and I suddenly realized if she opens her eyes and sees me there, it could put her over the edge forever. I said, I better get out of here.
You were the person actually least well positioned to help.
Right, exactly. So I ran away. I said, somebody else get her a drink of water. I don't want her to see me.
I read somewhere that you wrote your first Oscar acceptance speech when you were about 7 years old. Is that true?
Yes, it is.
Delivered it to the mirror?
I used to spend a lot of time when I was about 7 figuring out what I would say when I finally won my Oscar. Yes, I spent a lot of time on that. And then when it came time for, when I felt that I was going to win, I chose not to go to the ceremony. I was doing the same time next year on Broadway in New York, and people waited an awfully long time to get tickets for that show, and it didn't seem fair that, you know, they should come the night that they finally got their tickets, and I was off in California picking up an award. That didn't seem fair. But also, I think there was in me this sort of feeling of not wanting to get caught up in the fame thing, you know, and to really stay concentrated on my work, that was an important thing for my own character, so I didn't go. And then later years went by where, you know, I didn't win and I didn't win, and I started to think, you know, when good times come, you got to be there for them, you know, because bad times will come. So I think now I wouldn't make the same choice, but it was what I felt I had to do at the time.
So little Edna Ray Gilhooly, or Gilhooly was it?
Gilhooly.
Gilhooly, age 7, had her speech ready, and then when you win for Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore, somebody else picks it up for you.
Marty did. Yeah, I asked Marty to get it for me. But winning is winning, so it doesn't matter if you're there or not.
And we're back now with Ellen Burstyn. You were the first woman president of Actors Equity, and you were the artistic director of the Actors Studio for some time. So you have an activist background, and that plays itself out in some of your work. For example, Alice doesn't live here anymore, and it always seems so strange when something is acclaimed that initially there was resistance to getting it done. But you had to push to get that film made, didn't you?
Well, I was making The Exorcist at the time, and Warner Brothers was looking at the dailies, and they decided they want to make another film with me. And so they started sending me scripts. And in that period, which now this was about 1973, all of the scripts that they sent me, the women were either victims, being either raped or robbed or tortured or chased or in one way or another abused, or they were kind of somebody's idea of what a woman is, but not anything that I recognized. And I said, well, if you want to do a film with me, let's find something that's really of interest to me, that shows a woman as I understand a woman to be in all of her complexity, and not just a kind of one-dimensional idea. And so my agent found Alice, and it was written by Bob Getchell, and it wasn't quite as it ended up. It was more a light comedy, but I felt that it had a lot of potential for deepening, and I think that Bob Getchell and Marty Scorsese and all of the other people who worked on it succeeded in doing that. But the point all along was to present a woman with more depth and more layers than were usually done. Yes.
Do you think the situation has improved for women in film? We hear a lot of talk about it. Thelma and Louise, a lot of people thought was a seminal picture. Things are somewhat better. Nora Ephron was here. She's just directed a film. Jodie Foster, whom you worked with earlier in her career, directs Little Man Tate. Things seem a little better, but still a long way to go.
You've answered your question perfectly.
Thank you. Good night, everybody.
Yes, I would say that. It's better in the sense that if women bring in a project to a studio, as I did Alice, to Warner Brothers, that they're open to it. But we still have to make our own work in ways that I don't think that men do. You know, I don't see the effort coming toward us, but I see they're open when we go to them.
Early on in your career, and I didn't know this until they handed me some research, you worked with Jackie Gleason. Not on The Honeymooners, obviously, but on an earlier Jackie Gleason show that preceded The Honeymooners.
Well, The Honeymooners was part of the show. It was when the show was live. This was in 1955 and 6. And it was a live variety show. And so he did all of the characters.
Oh, that's where the lost episodes came from, so-called lost episodes of The Honeymooners came from.
Oh, did it? But, you know, he had the poor soul and Joe the bartender and all Reggie Van Gleason. He did all those different characters. And for me, that year was probably one of the most treasured years of my life, professional years, because just being with him and watching him perform, he and Art Carney, I might add, because the two of them were miraculous.
Now, what did you do on the show?
There were several classes of girls. There were the group who did the opening, the Jackie Gleason Show. Then there were the June Taylor dancers, and there were the showgirls. That was another group. And then there were a group of us that were the tie-in between the show and the commercial. So when they left a skit, they would go to one of us, and we would say something provocative to the camera, and that would introduce the commercial.
All gold filters.
But he was wonderful. We went on a trip once to Boston to open the Tuberculosis Foundation fund drive, and he took a bunch of the girls from the show with him on his famous train, you know, and we pulled out of Grand Central Station, and these curtains at the front of the train parted, and this Dixieland band started playing, and the waiters arrived with the gin and orange juice, and by the time we got to Boston, we could hardly walk. he was really an amazing person.
They say that train caravan was a monument to glorious success and another time in show business that if almost anyone else had tried it, it would have been grotesque, but he brought it off with great style.
It had such a great air of merriment about it and friendliness, you know. There was never anything kind of murky about it, except, of course, we drank too much, I'll have to say. I don't know quite how we managed to drink what we did at that time, but we were young and healthy. And I think, you know, there were a lot of times when a few of the girls had too much to drink that we ended up in one of the compartments crying on each other's shoulders because we proceeded to that stage. But mostly it was fun and wonderful. And then we got on and did this motorcade with all of us sitting in cars and Jackie sitting there in his big white trench coat like the big white whale. And it was a wonderful time.
You're back on the stage in Shimada. Tell me about that.
Shimada is, first of all, the word is Japanese for warrior. And it's, you know, when I agreed to do it, which was last September, it was before all the Japan bashing had started and before our president went to Japan. And I didn't realize that the play was going to be as controversial as it now will be, because it's about a situation in Australia where I play a woman who's running a bicycle company, bicycle factory, that was my husband's, and he died last year. And I'm bringing in Japanese investors because we're not doing very well. And Ben Gazzara plays a character who is the sales manager of the company and was my husband's best friend, and they were in a Japanese prisoner of war camp together. And both of those sets are on stage in both time periods, the prisoner of war camp and modern-day Australia. And when I bring in the Japanese investor, the Ben Gazzara character is convinced that it is their sadistic guard from World War II. So it's figuring into a lot of the fears that are happening here of Japan kind of getting revenge for World War II by buying up the country. And it's happened in Australia, and I'm sure it's happened in other countries too. So the play kind of investigates that and goes into it. It's very well written. And I'll be working with Ben Gazzara and Estelle Parsons and Mako. And it has an excellent cast, and I'm very excited about it.
Our thanks to Ellen Burstyn. I really enjoyed meeting you. Thanks for coming by.
Thanks for having me, Bob.
Time to hit the road, and we'll see you later.